Hello, Scott. So fun to have you today.
Thanks, Heather. Good to be here.
Oh, listeners, we're in for a treat today. Scott Schimmel he's like a new but old friend. Like just talking to him for a couple minutes, I've already felt like we're old friends. And I think it's a little bit of some of our similarities. When I got to see a little bit what you're involved in, there's some things that we're both passionate about. And I saw with kids and mental wellness and people living their best life, thinking of my book, the title of The Life You're Made For. We both believe that everybody has a unique life to live, and we're committed to helping them get there. So my whole team was like, you've got to interview Scott Schimmel. And I was like, I've already heard his name. I can't wait to interview him. So excited to have you here today. I think I'm just as excited about having you here as I feel like our listeners are going to really enjoy it. So
sweet.
Let me just pass it over to you and just tell our listeners a little bit of who you are, what you do, and what you're passionate about.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm in San Diego, and everyone should be praying for us because it's been hot for like the last 2 weeks, hot and humid. So I think I'm in San Diego. I'm ready to move. I've got 3 kids. I'm getting ready to coach little girls soccer pretty soon for our youngest. And that's a big part of what I do for fun and passion is coaching sports as a volunteer. So 2 teenagers, 2 out of 3 of those are teenagers, which you can imagine what that's like. And the greatest irony is I've been working professionally with teenagers, teaching parents and educators how to work with them. And now I have them. And that's a little bit different.
It's humbling, isn't it?
Yeah, my wife, like once a month, she's like, wait a second, don't you have a workshop for this? I'm like, oh gosh, you're right. Because I just forget. And my commitment to my kids is not to make them the constant illustration as I speak or train. But it's tricky because they're so good at giving me material for how irritating teenagers can be and how stripping it can be. So dad, husband for almost 20 years. And then I run a couple companies. One of them is the YouSchool. And that's probably what we'll talk about the most. It's helping kids design, build meaningful lives and all the ingredients they need for that. And then as you and I were talking a little bit, I have this creative agency because I've learned quite a bit about how to take big ideas that are abstract and make them relatable to people in digital formats. So online learning and transformation that can be done virtually. That's kind of a side passion project.
Oh, yes, we will be talking more about that because I'm getting ready to do my first e-course. So yes, that will be our sidebar after the podcast.
Yep. Let's do it.
Yes.
Dig in.
So let's pivot over to the, you called it the YouSchool. Is that right?
The YouSchool. Yep. That's right.
You as in Y-O-U, YouSchool.
Yep.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about how that got started and what the day-to-day kind of experience feels like for you now.
Yeah. So me and 2 other guys started 10 years ago, and I had spent a decade before then working in a ministry context with college kids. And the last year or so, I ended up after 9 years tracking down 400 alumni from this program, different, pretty significant universities, great degrees, really high achieving college kids. And we had given them, in addition to all that, mentoring, faith formation, taught them how to read the Bible, how to lead their friends in faith, how to do community service. So after 9 years, it occurred to me to figure out how are those alumni doing? I just was so wrapped up, I think, in the next group of freshmen or whatever. So I tracked down 400 of them. And I wanted to know, essentially, how are you doing in your late 20s, early 30s? And all of them, except for 3, had the exact same story. And the story was this: thank you so much for calling and asking. Nobody ever asked me how I'm doing, and I'm not doing well. This is 397 of them. I am no longer that close to God anymore, although I still believe, abstractly. I don't like what I do for a living. In fact, I have no idea how to get out of this and what to do next. And by the way, I'm lonely. And so it was not only like disheartening and bummer, it became this moment for me of like, that's not right. Yeah. And number one, it wasn't right that I had influenced and mentored them into that space, but also just looking at like, that's not right in terms of the system. You shouldn't have done all that and gone through all that and know how to do calculus and physics and write an essay and yet still not quite understand how to put a life together. And so I met a couple other guys who said really the same exact thing, but their version of it was these 2 corporate consulting guys. They're like, we work with them another 20 years later when they're running big companies And when you pull back the curtain a little bit, they will admit that they're pretty miserable or lost. And yet they've built this successful life that's really hard to break down unless they have a breakdown. And so then the question, the hypothesis became, where do you send somebody if you want to help them figure themselves out? What does that even mean? Is that Oprah? Is that Joel Osteen? Is that Tony Robbins? Is it a 12-step recovery program if they're addicted? Is it church? Or could there be a place and a process to figure yourself out? And that became the quest. And ever since, we specifically said, let's not, God bless middle-aged people who are having a midlife crisis. Someone's going to work with them. But what we want to do is try to solve that with the 15, 16-year-olds and help them try to identify what are the right questions that a young person needs to answer. That if they answer those questions, and they don't have to be the right answers for the rest of their lives, but if they got enough clarity and self-awareness about some of these big questions, it would lead to a series of better, more informed decisions that wouldn't get them on the wrong path in life. And so that's what we have been doing for 10 years, and specifically packaging that up into curriculum into public schools and charter and private schools, and working with educators and parents to come alongside kids in any way that we can, classrooms, sports and athletics. I'm speaking to the debutantes tonight, National Charity League in my area. So finding YMCA, finding where kids are and where there's an opportunity to have adults talking with kids about these really important conversations. And as a result, I really sell all day, create content and sell it into schools and with parents.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. We have a lot of crossover. I'm a credentialed teacher and I love the teaching background, and I taught in at-risk in East LA. Really was focusing on helping equip our students with thrival skills versus survival. Nice. I wanted them to have this new standard to say, you don't just get to survive life, but you get to thrive in life. And we didn't have language around it. So that was a lot of my passion in working with these students. And then it moved me into the field of coaching, where that really is my tagline. Like, we don't have to just survive life. We get to thrive. And we get to actually foster our clarity and our confidence and courage, which is the 3C living. And one of the things that really struck me when you're talking was asking good questions. I mean, one of the things I noticed a lot was, and there's a chapter in my book about it, but this idea that if we're asking a question the wrong way, and I'm hesitant to say it like that because I don't want to shame anybody saying there's a right way and a wrong way, but there kind of is. If we're asking a question like, what's wrong with me? You're going to get really good at answering what's wrong with you. You're going to have a list of things of what's wrong with you. So that's even one of the basic questions that I'll flip on its end and say, hey, instead of talking about what's wrong with you, because I work with a lot of high achievers and they've got a really robust list. I'll say, let's talk about what's right with you. And sometimes it's crickets for a while until they begin to shift their paradigm to recognize, wow, there's a lot going on that's right with me. And I get to live and work out of my strengths. So I guess that's what I wanted to ask you. Awesome. What's some of the questions that are coming up that are helping them kind of shift their paradigm and their mindset to get better answers?
Yeah, what we found is that there's 30 of them. And I agree with you. There's not only maybe better or worse ways to ask questions, there's better or worse questions. And for example, I think we're focusing right now on this idea of helping kids plan their future. And so typical parent or teacher or counselor comes alongside and says, hey kid, what are you thinking about? What are you going to do in the future? And that the way it's phrased, it really skews obviously towards college and career questions, which are critical. And that's primarily the anxiety and stress that we feel as adults and caretakers, and the kids feel that too. Like, they know they got to pay the bills and get a job, but it sets up for, because of its anxiety and stress as ingredients, like you're talking about, it really puts the mode of the conversation into survival. And so literally the brain shuts down and they're not able to think through these big abstract ways, like my values and my imagination and my ambitions. It's literally offline. Yeah. And yet we keep driving. Well, you're late. Your GPA is too low and you haven't done this, or you haven't had a job yet. Oh my gosh. You haven't applied ACT, SAT. So there are better questions and of course better ways to ask those questions. And so we've pulled together 30 of them. And I wish there was like 10 or 4 or like 12. Yeah. But it's the the exercise for probably 5 years now is going from demographic to group to say, take one of these questions off. Questions like, what does a good friend do? Because just as an example of, without friends, without friendships of belonging, without friends who you trust and know you, the idea of you being alone and isolated and growing your identity, figuring out who you are, learning how to serve others, it almost all goes away. And so it's not just, do you have friends, yes or no, but it's how do you put together a friendship? And so putting that question in front of a young person with an expectation that there is an answer and you will have one. It's presupposing, creates this environment, both if adults doing it right, it's trust and safe and psychological safety. But there's also some challenge there. Like, what's the answer? What is your answer? How do you resolve conflicts when you've wounded someone or vice versa? How other ones, there's 3 buckets: identity, purpose, and belonging. So we'll look at purpose, and rather than say, what's your passion? That kind of question. We'll talk about the problems that irritate them. What bothers you? What bothers you at school? What bothers you when you watch the news? What really irritates you and bugs you when you're hanging out with a group of people? Is it that people are late? Is it that someone gets excluded? Is it that people get overlooked? And to start pulling on some of those threads to see where they go. It's a part of the data set that we think they need. Getting to questions like, what do you value? What's most important to you and why? What are your priorities? Those kinds of questions. We have a list of these 30 that's on the website, and I'll send you after this too.
Please. Oh, I love it. I'm getting ready to speak at a mental wellness conference for students in San Diego. Actually, your backyard.
No way.
Yeah, at the convention center there. Have you heard of it?
Oh my gosh.
Student mental wellness conference. Yeah, come over and say hi to me.
I should.
Yes, because I'm doing it on helping our kids with anxiety. And when you were talking, and I coach this way too, we live in such an environment that we're keeping our central nervous system so spiked, and it's connected to our brain. Our brain has 3 different parts, and it's the survival brain, which is the fight, flight, or fawn and freeze. It's the emotional brain, which is all our emotions kind of coming at us. And then it's the thinking brain. Well, if your survival and your emotion brain are on really this heightened intensity level, you don't have the thinking brain. So you're not able to ask those great questions. You're just trying to figure out how to survive life. And, you know, I worked with at-risk, high extreme in East LA. So it was a lot of gang territory and everything like that. So I was very conscious of that. But I'm telling you, the more I work with humanity, it could just be I'm late for work, but it's still putting you in that survival mode, right? And so you stop thinking anything positive, and it starts moving you into this, what I call the downward spiral. And that was what my research was on, was if we can spiral down, we can spiral up. So this idea of how do we start spiraling up? And what I'm loving that you're saying is you're giving them hope that they can actually change their mindset. And it's a really an empowering paradigm versus what I think we've been probably, and I'll even throw out a bone to our educators and parents in our society. We probably subconsciously allowed them to be victimized by their own mindset, and probably by all the intense stuff that I didn't have to deal with growing up, with all the social media and just the screens and everything coming at them. We're still learning what it's done to our young minds, and we're still trying to figure out what is it they need. And I think to get really practical, and I love your 3 buckets: identity, purpose, and belonging. It's the human need, but more importantly, you teach them how to actually fill those buckets so that they're not just stuck with, well, I'm aware of that, but it's just empty all the time, and there's nothing I can do about it. That's the message I feel like we have sent too much of our young people. And then it's been very, very unempowering, or worse, enabling. And even like you mentioned about, you know, addictions or anything else, there is this hopelessness and even the cynicism that they don't have the power to go after their identity formation, their faith formation, their purpose, their belonging, to identify friends that really fill their cup and fill their heart, and the ones that don't, and how they become more selective on it instead of almost just being almost victimized by our world.
That's right. Yeah. I have no choices. I can't imagine a different future. all that stuff. We were working right before the shutdown, working with it was top 1 or 2, depending on the year, public high schools in the state of California. So really high achieving, really intense environment. And we were brought in because of a series of either attempts or real suicides by students. And then in this dichotomy of the place you worked, at risk, I mean, that term is just, I think, an interesting term, and deservedly so, at risk towards lots of things. But now, having worked in some of the most high pressure, high achieving places, the definition of at risk needs to be obviously redefined and opened up. And I absolutely agree that intensity, competitiveness that isn't, I almost say it rarely as adult driven at that level. It's student driven, it's peers, it's competition, it's survival of the fittest. It's there's only so many scholarships and acceptances in these colleges. And if you don't get it, your identity is ruined and you have no hope. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff that's really, really real, exacerbated obviously by social media. But yeah, the at-risk population, who isn't at risk these days?
I love that you said that, because, they taught me probably more than I taught them, but just watching them face the challenges they faced day to day and still rising. And sometimes them living a lifetime that I couldn't even conceive of in my 30 plus years of living when I was working there.
Yeah.
And so I just feel like they taught me that all of us have an at-risk, and all of us have the need to feel that sense of knowing how to address the stressors we face and not play that comparison game. Maybe because I've worked on the other end of the spectrum, these high achievers. And like you said, and I'm like, some of these kids who are like in a college, high school prep, and they've got a 4.8 GPA are worse off than some of my at-risk kids in the East LA. They are so worked themselves up into a frenzy about the need to succeed and what success really is. And they have no guiding voice to help them really define success. It's some unattainable, unreachable standard that is so incredibly unfair. It's heartbreaking, listening to them.
Or gets really lucky on TikTok or YouTube, become an influencer. That has become, I think maybe 10 years ago, as I worked with at-risk kids, there's a lot of, I want to be an NBA star or hip hop artist. And that's been translated now into, I want to, be an influencer or a YouTube channel and make, and it's close enough, accessible enough. It seems like every kid knows a kid who knows a kid who is now making $1 million a year through social media ads or something.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Scary. And then that, I think that unfortunately makes it even harder for young people to imagine a future. I think for me, it was, do you want to go into accounting, medicine, law? That was hard enough.
Yeah.
But now it's like, oh, I can also be there's so many different possibilities. And to your point, what does a successful life look like? I don't even know if that's being asked in a lot of places, but that'd be a good question alone. Hey kid, what do you think is a successful life? How do you know that? Who taught you that? But what do you think about that? Like those are, there's an exercise right there to help a kid get some more clarity.
I asked this of an executive the other day, and he goes, and I literally said, well, what would success look like for this project? Because I have no idea. And I'm so embarrassed that I don't know. And I'm like, yeah, I know. Good. You've got enough self-awareness to recognize that if you don't know what success is and you can't define it, you can't lead your team in it. So it was a funny conversation where he admitted, he goes, let me get back to you on that. I said, get back to me on that. And make sure you define that, because then we're going to get your talking points and lead your team. So they know what success is and they can know what it is they're hitting. But you're right on. Sometimes we don't move. It's part of thriving is slowing down long enough to say, what is success and what is success for me?
Yeah.
And have I been handed a level of success that I don't want to buy into or I don't agree with? We don't even stop to ask that. We just push, which keeps us into that survival mode. And then we wonder why we're so angry or depressed or frustrated or anxious, or
lost.
Fatigued, all these things that I typically meet people where they're at. People don't come to me when they're thriving. They come to me when they're like, I think I'm losing it, or I'm really surviving life here. Maybe there's a better way,
Right. Yeah.
So let me get a little bit more personal with you, Scott. of course, and I know we both agree on this, we kind of practice what we teach and preach, and we believe in this ourselves. How are you applying a lot of what you believe? How do you live it out day to day?
That's a good question. I would almost disagree. My joke, it's just not really a joke, as I lead exercises for people, making them do this stuff. I always joke and say, hey, I don't like doing this stuff, so I make you all do it. And I've said that long enough now, and realize I don't do the work enough, ironically. And for me, it's a consistent return to journaling my thoughts, having honest conversations with my friends, having a therapist, a spiritual director, long walks with my wife, and there's a lot of introspection. But having two teenagers does make the game more real to me, because the like kind of that abstract timeline of them leaving now looks very, very recent. And not to mention that they've already pulled away normally, naturally. So what does my influence look like? And what will they remember about my influence? So I feel like, in a good way, the stress of their presence matters to me and forces me to think pretty often, who do I want to be? What kind of impression do I want to leave? What kind of mood do I want to share with them? How do I want to open up my life to them? And I used to be able to bring them around when I spoke, so they got to hear me, but then I realized they forgot everything I said. And this was a story about them. So they won't listen to me anymore. And now what we're really trying to do, at least here in our little town, is create these series of workshops for kids. Really about a year ago, I went to a friend of mine and said, hey, I want my kid to go through this curriculum that I created. And because it's not in their school currently, I can't figure out how to sell to their school for the life of me. There's no chance that they're going to actually go through that. And how tragic and ironic it would be if the head of the YouSchool and their own kid, his own kid, couldn't answer these questions. So I went to my friend and said, hey, could you lead these things? And he's like, yeah, of course. So then now, about once a month, we're having these open workshops, just like you'd have at a church or like National Charity League. There's parents who understand stuff outside of school is important. And we get together 12 to 30 kids at a time, and we walk them through these questions in an interactive format. So my kids are doing that now, and I am showing up and I am answering some of these questions. And so far, they haven't asked me to leave. So I'm going to keep doing that work with them.
Well, I'm rooting you on. And I think that I do think our state education is shifting a little bit because of all the desperate things that's been happening across our country. So, and I do know that a lot of money, I've heard the word billion word used for the state of education is
social emotional learning, mental health. Yeah.
It's getting allocated for this. I mean, it's the conference I'm running down to speak at. So there's this definite awareness of a significant need, and that teaching the 3 R's isn't cutting it anymore. And so how do we evolve as educators, and how do we support our parents in evolving, and how do the parents support the educators in evolving? And where do we need to just evolve to recognize the anxieties that are pressures that our children are facing that we didn't face 20 years ago? And that's the tricky part, I think, just to jump in. I think the idea of kids answering these questions without illustration is impossible. So it requires that the adults in a kid's life recognize that their responsibility is not just to teach them the 3 R's or whatever the discipline is or whatever the sport is, but to specifically be modeling the kind of life where those answers to those questions are lived out well, and that there are answers. And so it turns into, for us, coming alongside coaches, teachers, parents, and helping them go through the exact same questions. And then more than anything, just letting them know that's your job. Like the whole community knights you in the name of whoever and says your job is to develop kids. And that doesn't mean teach them calculus. It doesn't mean getting AP exam passed or getting recruited to a college level sport. It looks like them answering these questions, and they won't until you do first. They really won't be able to unless they see that mirror from you. And the best research I've seen says every kid needs 5 adults involved in their life. And that's different than knowing 5 adults. Like I knew lots of adults, but I didn't have a conversation with an adult until I was about 20. Like beyond what time's the tests, when's practice, what's my job? Like I had lots of conversations, but no real interactions. And so to
give teachers and parents and educators a permission
Mm-hmm.
and a roadmap to say, share these stories.
Mm-hmm.
Have you failed in your life?
Mm-hmm.
Did you learn things about yourself and about the world through
Mm-hmm.
failure?
Mm-hmm.
What are they? Now, this week, here's the theme of the week, failure. Why don't you start every single class, or when you got your kid captured in the car for 20 minutes, all you need to do, what works 100% of the time, is to turn to them and say, did I ever tell you about that time I totally crashed and burned and got caught cheating on the test? Or did I ever tell you about that time I broke up with a girl and I realized I made a huge mistake? Did I ever tell you about the time that I failed my driving test? Like, did I ever tell you about the time I got fired from a job? What's the kid going to say? 100% of the time, the kid's going to say, no, tell me the story. And they need to hear that over and over and over again from a variety of adults. And it's something that we can practice. We have the context for that. We have the context for adults to share their lives with kids. They just don't know. I don't think they know yet that they're allowed to, supposed to, or what to share.
That's so well said. I think that's that old school thought of, you don't tell them your bad stories because it's a bad example, right? And
totally. Yeah.
We saw it. My kids are now out of the home. We're just empty nesting. So they're
sweet.
Yeah, they're at two different universities. And I adore them, and they're just become very good friends. So, we're on the other side here, and we've worked really hard with our conversations. But one of the things that my husband and I realized we were doing is we were kind of reliving our glory days in high school, totally oblivious that our kid is suffering, and kind of comparing himself to I'm not measuring up to this. And when we saw that, we immediately shifted courses and said, did I ever tell you about the time your mom really blew it? I was a softball pitcher and I threw it over the backstop and everyone was laughing at me. Oh boy, that was a long day. How did I handle humiliation? How did I handle that resiliency and coming back? And what did I think of myself? What were some of the things I thought for a long time? And how long did it take me to laugh about it? These were things that we began to start realizing is, don't sit there, go on about your glory days just because you have a captive audience.
That's right.
Not so helping them. And so just learn how to step into that, and then helping them to see you as fallible. And I remember my kid's messing up. And I said, yep, I've made the same mistake, especially the older they got. And I said, I've made the same mistake. In fact, I made it worse sometimes. Like, this is how bad I did it now. But I will tell you what I learned from it, so that I didn't make the same mistake again, and I want to see what you've learned from it. Go ahead.
Maybe, I don't know if it's worse or different, but kids collectively now watching the adults in their life not handle the stress that they feel, the anxiety they feel, uncertainty feel in a productive way, not talking about it, not doing the normal mental health things that we're all pretty aware of now, but rather scrolling on social media, drinking, laughing about drinking, working harder, remodeling a bathroom, like all these distractions. And then back again to that question you asked before, what is a successful life? Well, I mean, apparently it's just don't talk about it. Try to get the next accolade or accomplishment under my belt. Maybe then I can go on vacation, I guess, but then fight while we're on vacation. Like, I guess that's it. One of the things I've said a lot to students, and kind of stumbled on it, but this idea that a lot of parents will tell kids, I don't care what you do, I just want to make sure that you're happy. And I've said it as a parent, but because I've worked mostly with students and listened to them, I remember hearing one kid, I just asked him, I was like, is that helpful? And he's like, no. And he almost was angry about it. I'm like, well, why is that not helpful? Because that's a really nice thing for your parents to say. No expectations, like no pressure. He's like, they're miserable. They're miserable people. And now they want me to be happy. He goes, I already know I have to get a job, but now I'm supposed to be happy too.
Right.
And I've never even seen it. I've never seen happiness
it's not
before.
Being modeled.
So how would you put together a happy life if you haven't seen it? And I get it. Parents who don't feel that way, don't make the same mistakes I did. So I want you to be happy, find fulfillment, find your passion. But it's really, unfortunately, it always starts with the adults first, which is why I love your question. Make it personal about me. It is about me.
It is. And when you haven't grown up with it, because I didn't grow up with that kind of parenting. Like I said, I think it's that older school of you don't ever tell them everywhere you blew it. And so then you always feel like, dang, I could never measure up to my godlike parents. Right. So I just remember thinking, I'm going to share with my kids. And I remember my daughter at 15 going through a very hard friendship time. And unfortunately, I was as well. My tendency was to say, don't share with her about how painful yours is right
Right.
now. Just focus on her. But I felt this nudge.
Yeah.
I'm like, she's old enough. She needs to know that
Mhm.
you don't just conquer this. I don't want her to be surprised at
That's
52,
right.
you know, like, sorry, we
Yeah.
have hard friendship times too. And I just shared,
Yeah.
I'm going through a very hard friendship shift too. I said, so we're going to be in this together. And
Yeah.
the first stage is kind of the grieving, and we're going to be lonely a little bit, and it's going to be okay because we're making room for new
Yeah.
friendships. So we're going to keep
Yeah.
talking about this, but we're in the thick of it. That was a
That's great.
whole new way to talk to my kid. It wasn't talked to with me, but going
Yeah.
back full circle, something you said
Yeah.
earlier that I wanted to circle back around. I just said,
Uh-huh.
I think I could say that because I have a counselor in my life. I have a coach in my life. I have a
Right.
consultant in my life. I have a spiritual
Right.
director as well. I mean, it's a little
Right.
embarrassing, my team that I have
Yeah.
around me. But I'm like, I don't want to, I'm a teachable person. And I also feel like it's in the work that I do. And I'm like, that's how I model it. You know, I don't ever
Yeah.
pretend to have the
That's
answers. I want to say I'm a student of life, and I'm going to go get some of the best teachers I know out there to walk me through some of these stages that I have never lived before. I've never been a parent of a 18-year-old and a 20-year.
Yeah.
And what do I know? I've never been married for 30 years.
Yes.
Like, this is a first time for
Yeah.
everything. And I
Right.
welcome good insight and good advice on that. So I guess I just wanted you to speak a little bit
Love
to
it.
that. How do you welcome in almost like your guides or your Yodas in your life to support where you're at? How does that work for you?
Yeah, I remember years when we first started YouSchool, we were invited to come in and run the curriculum essentially for a mentoring program. And it was an at-risk school. A lot of them have these sorts of things. Hundreds of volunteers mentor kids, and they asked me to come and be a mentor. So I came, and it was kind of before we offered our suggestions to change it. Let me experience it. And I remember I was assigned these 3 students I never met before. And then I was supposed to sit down with them once a month for the entire year, 9 times. And I remember the last 2 or 3 times, I remember thinking like, I don't want to go to this. I don't want to go to this. And then I go and I'm trying to I'm going through the curriculum. I'm trying to get them to tell me things, and they're supposed to work on SMART goals. And it's a very traditional mentoring program. And at the last meeting, I looked around this library with a bunch of other mentors and kids. And I'm like, I just had this thought. I'm like, I am literally a professional mentor for kids. That's literally what I do professionally. And I'm looking around and I see realtors and bankers and, and these people are not professional mentors with kids. I'm like, if this is bad for us and these kids, how bad must it be for them?
Yeah.
Maybe there's some magic happening, but it's probably not true.
Let's not lie to ourselves.
Yeah, that last time I just turned to the kids and I was like, how's this really been? Like, pretend you're never going to see me again, because you won't. How bad was this? Because I didn't like this. And they just open up and they're like, yeah, it just was forced.
Yeah.
And we were on the spot the entire time.
Yeah.
And then I was like, wouldn't it have been better if I just told you about my life? And they were like, yeah, we don't know anything about you. And I yet had given them advice, and they'd listen to talks. And so the shift that we made was, I don't think a kid, or really most people, want a mentor. In other words, I don't want someone to come and tell me what to do and create more stress in my life and how I'm doing it wrong. But advice and perspective and storytelling, I'm totally open to that. And so I've noticed that with students, with kids. I know the teachers that I was connected to as a young person, as a student, I didn't have a personal relationship with them in reality, but I did because I heard them tell stories about their lives, and I loved them, and I wanted to pursue career fields in what they taught.
Yeah.
I've heard that from so many students. I love this teacher. I work harder, even though it's not my favorite subject. So that human connection, that idea of there are people around you that have something to share with you outside your family. Teenagers are craving that. They don't want to listen to their parents. They want to find an identity, and they're looking outside the home. And so I think they're actually very, not just warm, but very keen on finding other examples of life to live. And until then, it's just the blind leading the blind. It's a bunch of other teenagers saying, hey, follow me. I think I know what the way through this. And they're all idiots. I say that with love. Yes. But they don't really know anything. Yeah. And I know that as I go in, and there's other people that I know that are amazing speakers and facilitators with students. And that vibe works 100% of the time, regardless of demographic. As a guy who grew up in South Orange County in a gated community, I think I've impacted lives in the kind of environment you worked in and you taught in. and gang prevention. I've no business being there. I have nothing really to share about when I was in your shoes, but yet I do have life experiences to share and stories for them to listen to. And then a way to frame for them to reflect on their lives the way I've shared about mine. And in that context, I've learned that lots of young people will want to have those deep conversations. In fact, I think they're desperate to.
Yeah. You know what I love that you're saying too, and this thought struck me as you were talking. Like one of my takeaways is we're all still teenagers. We're all looking for belonging, purpose, and identity. And I think there's a certain humility in that reminds us that we're not done evolving. And we all want some of these guides. We have a little bit more fancier names for them as adults,
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
But we still are looking for these guides to support us stepping into a really purposeful, meaningful life and maybe do things for the first time that we didn't have modeled to us. Isn't that what our kids are looking for as well? They're looking for, do I have what it takes? And we get to be there with a resounding, yes, you do. You hold it all within you. You have what it takes. And it's the same work I do with adults too. And I've worked with kids and adults. And I'm telling you, that's one of the transferable truths I've learned about humanity. Everybody's coming to me, CEOs of multi-million-dollar companies. Do I have what it takes? And I was like, yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. You've just outgrown this other paradigm. It's okay. Let's start talking about a new way of thinking. Let's start talking about how your identity is kind of reforming and evolving. Let's talk about that. And all I'm going to do is offer this reassurance that you have it within you and you got it. You totally got it. And I think that's a little of what we're doing. We're whispering to people going,
that's right.
Do I have this? I mean, you heard me say it to you before. I'm like, oh my gosh, can you help me sell something to Scott? Because I've got a lot coming at me, man. I heard you know how to sell. I don't even think I introduced myself. I'm like, hi, I heard you know how to sell.
Let's go.
Let's go. I got to sell my e-course and all my books that I'm doing and all the great ideas that I love. And so I just love that you're doing that. And I think that there's so much that teaches us not just about kids, but just about humanity. And again, as a leadership coach, it transfers so much into how we lead, because I believe leadership starts from within. So if we're in touch with who we are and our own identity, and we're understanding some of our formation, who we were as kids and how we evolved or got stunted or whatever it was that our history and our background is, we're able to really have a whole new perspective of what we need today. And the cool thing is there's nothing stopping us. We can go get it.
That's right.
We can go ask for it. And it's waiting there. And I truly believe that teachers and guides are just waiting for us. When the student is ready, the teacher will come, that old, whatever proverb.
That's right.
I just love that. So I guess I want to, as we wrap up, I want to ask you, what's some encouragement you would want to leave with our listeners?
Yeah, I think just to build on what you shared, the tagline that we use, and it's every time I say it, I realize how cliche and hallmarky or Instagrammy it sounds. But the idea that you only get one life and it's your story and the transition to make between trying to live into the expectations that you perceive others have for you. In other words, someone else's story for you. And figuring out what your story is, I believe, the most important thing that we can do every day. As a dad, as a business owner, as a friend, as a neighbor, like every single time, what story am I living? Whose story is it? Am I listening to what I think they said about me or what they actually said about me? Or especially if you're doing public work like you, like to read a comment or hear a whisper, and then to allow that sink in, to actually look at that, pick it up, and then go back to that mirror of what do I think? What do I have to give? What do I care about? What do I find beautiful and worth my time? And then choosing that. I think, again, what you just shared is the same. It's the same thing. It's your life. It's your story. Pick up the pen and write it.
Yeah. Gosh, well said. Pick up the pen and write it. Okay. My last closing question. I've learned to ask this to all my guests.
Okay.
I just going to do an assumptive close that you do this, but when I'm working with people, there's usually people who are living very intentional lives. They have some sort of a morning ritual. So I want to ask you, what's your morning ritual?
Oh, this could take a while. So I'm very regimented. Get up, take the dog for a walk. It's a 35-minute loop. Come back. I ride an exercise bike in my garage, my COVID kind of Nordic track Peloton thing. I watch a show while I'm doing that because I like to watch shows and sports. And then I come in, make breakfast. I walk a girl to school. I come back, spend 20, 30 minutes reading Bible, journaling, reading something I like in front of and next to my son because I want him to know that's what I do. I didn't let him know that for years. I just did it by myself. Take him to school. Then I run to the driving range and I hit a bucket or two of balls and I make a phone call and I come home, take a shower and start the day.
Oh. What time do you
if I don't get to do that, I'm
3 a.m.?
so cranky. 6. I go
That's
fast.
amazing. Yeah, I'm looking at your golf clubs in the background. Oh, that's awesome.
Yes.
So that
I need something that I fail at all the time, and that's it.
So that's kind of what centers you to get you in the mindset and the space that you need to be in. Oh, I love it.
That's it. Yeah.
I'm so glad I asked. I never regret asking. I'm always like, that's so intriguing. I hear
So
all
bizarre.
sorts of answers. I have never heard that one.
I'm a nut.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Scott. So fun getting
Thanks, Heather.
to know you over this podcast. And I'm going to pick your brain for some more stuff later on your
let's go.
The message shop. I want to hear more about that too. So
Let's go.
Thanks for
Heather.
joining us. And thanks so much, listeners, for joining us. And feel free to leave a review. That helps us out quite a bit. All right. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. We'd love a review. Helps us out quite a bit. Wherever you are, just drop a review. And you can find out more at heatherpenny.com. Cheering you on.